This roundtable brings together a panel of leaders in sustainability and higher education to share their perspectives on the recently published report from the National Academies, Strengthening Sustainability Programs and Curricula at the Undergraduate and Graduate Levels. All of the individuals invited have followed the 18-month process that resulted in this report. Some attended workshops in the process. Others were advanced reviewers of the report, and all are actively involved in the ongoing discourse on sustainability curricula. The purpose of this roundtable is not to recap or summarize the National Academies report. This discussion assumes that the attendees have familiarized themselves with the report in advance. We provided the link to the free download to the National Academies website in the announcement. Several members of the 6-person committee tasked by the National Academies have appeared at recent major conferences, including the ASHE Online Conference and the more recent NCSE Drawdown Online event, to present their committee's take on the report findings and to offer their recommendations. Those summary presentations are available on the respective conference websites. Today's roundtable will be a moderated discussion. I will be the moderator. We expect to elicit varied views and opinions reflecting the range of reactions to the report in the community of practice thus far. The panelists will present their own individual insights and analyses and are not speaking on behalf of their institutions. None of the panelists have been asked to preview or tailor their remarks. All have been simply asked to prepare in response to the following 3 questions. What topics are covered well in the report? What topics could have been covered better or more completely? And where has the report missed the boat? After our panel discussion, and again, I hope it will elicit a range of views, attendees will have the opportunity to comment or ask questions via the moderator. Please, as I mentioned, use the chat box, and as we have done in all SCC webinars. Yes, I'm still here. I'm just pulling up the fact sheet. So again, here is some basic background. This is not a recap of the report. This is just some factual information about the National Academies and the committee that prepared this report. So the National Academy of Sciences is a United States not-for-profit, non-governmental organization. It is not part of the government. The National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine provide independent, objective advice to inform policy with evidence, spark progress and innovation, and confront challenging issues for the benefit of society. Agencies of the US government fund about 85% of the Academy's activities. Further funding comes from state governments, private foundations, and industrial organizations. In this instance, for this panel, the committee tasked by the National Academies, the sponsor of this effort was the George and Cynthia Mitchell Endowment for Sustainability and the Cynthia and George Mitchell Foundation. The National Academies reports are viewed as being valuable and credible because of the institution's reputation for providing independent, objective, and nonpartisan advice with high standards of scientific and technical quality. This committee was an ad hoc committee under the Science and Technology for Sustainability program in collaboration with the Board on Higher Education and Workforce. They planned and conducted a series of 3 public workshops focused on strengthening sustainability programs and curricula at the undergraduate and graduate levels in the United States. Each workshop examined different perspectives and drivers for a coherent, competency and skill-based curriculum in the growing number of higher education sustainability programs in order to connect them to issues addressed through such frameworks as the UN Sustainable Development Goals and the priorities of end users, including the private and public sectors. The committee was asked to prepare a report that provides findings and recommendations for strengthening sustainability programs and curricula at the undergraduate and graduate levels that relate to the SDGs and other relevant sustainability frameworks. Today's roundtable is intended to share perspectives on that final report of the committee. This was the committee. The chair, Ann Kapuscinski from the University of California, Santa Cruz, Chris Boone from Arizona State, Aaron Agarwal from the University of Michigan, Garrick Louie from the University of Virginia, Dorcetta Taylor from the University of Michigan, and Aaron Bromagem from the Office of the Mayor of Los Angeles. Ann Kapuscinski, Aaron Agarwal, Garrick Louie, and Dorcetta Taylor. I'll offer my own commentary here. Top tier scholars, well regarded in their field, and they have also run and coordinated academic programs and initiatives. Chris Boone, better known to those of us in this community of practice, is a dean at Arizona State University in the Sustainability School. And Aaron Bromagem is working on aligning the SDGs for the city of Los Angeles through the mayor's office. That was the panel assigned to prepare this report. And they were asked to provide an overview of current practices and major advances in sustainability education, examine a comprehensive set of key competencies, identify strengths, gaps, priorities, and opportunity for engagement with the SDGs. Interestingly, as commentary, including the accreditation of programs or national level organizations to support and guide sustainability programs, fostering partnerships between schools, universities to enhance recognition of the SDGs, and to discuss research agendas relating to sustainability and the SDGs and the role of academic institutions to inform post-2030 processes. In other words, the period beyond the effective dates of the Sustainable Development Goals. So, enough with the fact sheet. Now we enter the main event. So I would like to call on our first pair of panelists, and let's see if, well, I've invited David Blockstein, who many of us know from his work with the Association for Environmental Studies and Sciences, and David is now leading the Solve Climate 2030 initiative. I know David is here. I'm looking for Aaron Redman, who was invited and confirmed. Aaron, if you're here, please turn on your video. And meanwhile, while we're waiting for Aaron, I will turn the floor over to David for his comments. In this opening round, each grouping will get to share approximately 12 minutes. So David, you've got the next 6 or 7 minutes until Aaron Redman is available. David.
All right, well, thank you very much, Ira, for having this discussion and for inviting me. It's great to see so many people and at least to see the names of so many old friends here. So first of all, I just want to let people know that I do need to leave a little bit before 1 o'clock. I'm not going to talk myself that whole time, but we have a meeting with our program leaders for the Solve Climate 2030 project. So first of all, I want to congratulate the National Academy and the authors for this report. It's really important just from the big picture perspective that the Academy is recognizing this field of sustainability education. The report provides additional credibility for something that we all know is essential to our societies, but not all of science recognizes that. The report rightly recognizes the diverse origins and practices of sustainability education. But for that reason, I admit to more than 3 decades, I'm old now, of ambivalence about the core recommendation of development of core competencies and capacities. Obviously, there are great benefits of self-examination, but I see risks of uniformity in a field that is diverse and forever changing. I'm also concerned about who would make that determination. Who would be in the room where it happens? Would the competencies only be determined by the elites and top institutions, such as those on this National Academy panel? I recognize that they did bring in a lot of us to give us diverse perspectives, but I'd be concerned whether competencies would be developed by a truly inclusive process that embraces the inherent subjectivity of sustainability. A related issue that was addressed by the report is the issue of diversity and inclusion. That inclusion and justice are intrinsic to sustainability. If there's no justice, there's no sustainability. And the diversity, equity, and inclusion, and these are 3 different things. We sort of lump them together, but they're 3 different things. They're intrinsic to justice, which means that they're intrinsic to sustainability. Yet the report, I think, falls short in focusing largely on diversity, demographics, and numbers, talking about attracting and supporting individuals from underrepresented populations. But equity and inclusion requires programs that are equitable and inclusive themselves. That diversity is an outcome of equity and inclusion, but the emphasis seems to be on attraction and diversity rather than equity and inclusion. Diversity won't be achieved by recruiting students and faculty into programs and institutions that are historically or institutionally biased or unintentionally unwelcoming. And this isn't really addressed that much. And this also then goes back to my concern about core competencies. If core competencies are not developed in an inclusive way, recognizing that, for example, and with the scholarship of Shirley Vincent, my former colleague when we were both with the National Council for Science and the Environment, and Shirley's research demonstrates that minority serving institutions are much less likely to have sustainability and even environmental studies programs. And so if core competencies are not developed in a really inclusive way, including people that do not consider themselves sustainability educators, then they're going to make the field more exclusive, and that will be counterproductive to our goals. So I thank you for your time and for listening to these thoughts, and I look forward to hearing from you, the rest of you.
Thank you, David. If Aaron Redman has not arrived, Aaron, speak up or forever hold your peace. We will move on to the next pairing. We have Rebecca Potter from the University of Dayton and Krista Heiser from the University of Hawaii. So the two of you, Krista and Rebecca, have the next 12 minutes or so to share your initial thoughts. Again, hopefully we will have time at the end to do another round and take comments and questions. So over to you. Who would like to start? Rebecca.
Okay, thank you, Ira. I'll also try to be brief. And of course, I echo many of the points that David made. At the ASHE conference, I talked about the difficulties in defining even the basic concepts behind the competencies that are listed in the report. I also today, though, want to focus on something different, and that's its mentioning of accreditation and employment, which it mentions both at the beginning of the report on page 10 and then in a later section looking at employment data. Where I found this really important is that it first asks professional societies to be part of this discussion, and it also stresses that this report is to launch a discussion that indeed needs to be inclusive. I praise that aspect of the report. I also acknowledge the huge task in front of them, but also acknowledge, as David mentioned, that the group that at least spearheaded the effort, they solicited information from others, did not necessarily represent a broad range of types of educational institutions. And I would have liked to have seen also some more participation from people in professional fields. I was glad to see that the report, even though it said that they mentioned accreditation, realized that there was not a consensus on that. And I think as educational professionals in fields of sustainability, I myself am heading up a very new program in sustainability. I am concerned that we would move too quickly in the direction of professional accreditation, and it would be at a cost of the discipline, especially for reasons that we know about professionalization through accreditation, that you can have a path dependency in that you start to assess for the things that are identified by the accrediting institution, and that locks you in. It would contradict our attempts at interdisciplinarity. It very well could contradict our attempts at diversity and inclusion. So I would say that as these professional organizations engage in this discussion, we should be very careful about what we could lose by accreditation. And then just to continue that point, they did call out the need to define what sustainability education provides in degree programs in terms of employment opportunities for our students. And this was brought home to me recently when we, at the Hanley Sustainability Institute, we have our monthly meetings. A lot of grad students are at that meeting. They're finding great opportunities for employment, but one incredibly bright grad student said she's engaged in an internship with the city of Dayton because sustainability provides you with an education that makes you a jack of all trades, master at none. I think that's something our discipline is facing in terms of its identity. And so we have to decide, well, what does that mean for us going forward? Are our students going to struggle finding placement in jobs? What are those jobs going to look like? I think that the report kind of missed the boat by looking at sustainability in employment sector completely broadly, any field that included some aspect of sustainability would be assessed as providing jobs. But would one of my graduates from my program work in agribusiness, work in wildlife management? I'm not sure. We might be kind of the pre-med for the planet program, where praxis and internships and graduate study will be expected. But I don't think that's the expectation of our students. So I would encourage more input on that professional front, and that's where I think we have a lot of work to do.
Thank you, Rebecca. Aloha, my name is Krista Heiser, and I teach at community college in the University of Hawaii system. And I'm also the director of the Center for Sustainability Across the Curriculum, which is one of 14 regional centers of the ASHE. So my comments sort of speak to that approach. Excuse me. What I really value about this report is the existence of this common set of core competencies. My colleagues and I, just for an example of how they can be used, we developed an entry-level rubric to assess our programs across different disciplines using the entry level of the key competencies to look at the foundation of where do sustainability professionals begin in the undergraduate curriculum. How do we lay that foundation in the community colleges and in the general education curriculum? I really love in the report the language around change agents. I personally was very influenced and motivated by Deb Rowe's work around change agents, and I love that that phrase is included throughout. I also appreciate the small but I felt sincere mention of Indigenous wisdoms and the role of knowledges that exist outside of the academy. I feel that the topics of professional development and the recommendations that are made around, for example, team teaching, learning communities, interdisciplinary teaching are excellent recommendations, but perhaps do not adequately capture the condition of the faculty at this moment, which has gotten, the faculty is much beleaguered, especially coming out of COVID, I hope. There's a need for just a massive upskilling and retraining across our faculty to address sustainability issues in every discipline. There's a lot of confusion and problems around hiring. Where do these sustainability PhDs come from? How are we going to hire them? What are the definitions for meeting minimum qualifications? Who can teach sustainability classes? And the real need for tenure and promotion incentives to incentivize working with sustainability across the curriculum. We have suffered such a loss of professional development. There is so little funding for this type of professional development. Even like a $300 stipend is really hard to give to faculty. Travel to conferences, it's just gone even before COVID. And I'm currently team teaching with a biology colleague. So I'm teaching science writing and she's teaching biology. And that's just awesome. But it's really insane workload. So it's easy to say that team teaching is great, but you have to back it up. Our faculty teach a 5-4 course load, and that's just insane. So we have to be training and supporting faculty to teach in these ways. And I think the report doesn't quite capture the morale of faculty in many of our universities. And then my last comments, I think that the language of the report is perhaps a bit overblown for the scope of the report. I understand that the report is defining competencies in sustainability programs, but these programs are such a tiny portion of our universities. And we have sustainability programs producing these awesome graduates on the right hand of the university, while the left hand of the university is still producing traditional business and economics majors. And it just doesn't make any sense. And if we put too much into these programs without balancing in the general education curriculum, then the programs simply allow universities to continue business as usual. Environmental education in the 70s was ineffective because it became its own silo, and I think that risks happening again. I maintain that we need to be integrating sustainability into every program in the humanities, in the social sciences, in the natural sciences. We need to be massively retraining and upskilling our faculty and engaging undergraduate students in understanding climate change, sustainability issues, and the impact on their future. There is no assurance that our students fully understand the impacts of climate change, the science of climate change, the possible sustainability solutions. We need more emphasis in the general education curriculum. And then my last point is a very unpopular one, which is about the need for emotional support. Faculty need training to address the emotional domain. When we talk about these issues, they arise existential crises in undergraduate students, and it requires a lot of skill and support for faculty and counselors to address climate anxiety is kind of the umbrella term. Suicide is the second leading cause of death in the ages 10 to 34, and the rates of suicidal ideation among adolescents are very high. So I think we need to take those existential matters very seriously, and there's an international group developing a climate anxiety toolkit. So I would add that into the professional development pot. These are my comments, and mahalo so much, Ira, for hosting this forum and for inviting me.
And my thanks to both of you for just an incredible range of important insights. And hopefully people will be putting questions and comments for both of you into the chat box, and we'll circle back to you after we complete the first round, which continues now with a trio of scholars: Michael Reiter from Bethune-Cookman, Paul Baresi from Southern New Hampshire University, and Rick Smardon from Environmental Science and Forestry of State University of New York, SUNY. Gentlemen, you have the next 12 minutes or so to do with what you may.
Well, I guess I'm first up, and I'm getting a lot of feedback. So a couple folks have the microphones on, maybe that is an issue. Well, so any study or any discussion of sustainability education must start with the answers to two questions. The first is, what is it that we want to sustain? And the second is, how would we know when that thing is sustainable? And the NAS report, it seems to me, has some problems in that regard. So the report relies on the following definition. Sustainability, it says, refers to achieving individual, societal, and environmental well-being in, not for, in present and future generations. And then after some explanatory materials, the report says, the irreducibility of different goals, approaches, and outcomes is an inherent characteristic of sustainability. Now, it's a pretty good argument, it seems to me, that this qualification eviscerates the definition itself, but let's just set aside that question and instead deal with the many crucial questions that the definition itself leaves unanswered. Several of them have to do with the objects of sustainability. So in the definition, individual well-being presumably refers to the well-being of human individuals. and societal well-being apparently refers to human societies. But between human individuals and human societies are a whole range of human social groups, which the definition doesn't address. It's an approach to societies and their structure. It's a very Western approach to how society is conceptualized, which is relevant to diversity and equity and inclusion. The meaning of environmental well-being in this definition strikes me as much less clear. Are we talking about the environmental well-being of human individuals and human societies? Or are we talking about the well-being of one or more environments, which is different? If we're talking about the latter, the well-being of one or more environments, then one or more environments of what? Well, the scope of any environment is defined by the scope of whatever it is that's being environed. But the definition doesn't tell us. What does it mean for any of those things to be well? Are we interested in achieving some threshold of well-being, some minimum amount that would qualify whatever it is that we're trying to sustain as sustainable? Or are we talking about the ensuring the existence of some process that produces or maintains well-being in some specified or unspecified amount? Again, we don't know. And then we come to the time horizon. The definition specifies this time horizon as in present and future generations. So the reference to present and future generations on its face, as worded, is a reference to the period of time over which whatever it is that we're trying to sustain should be sustained in present and future generations. Well, how many future generations? 10, 100, 1,000, indefinitely? How would we know today that whatever it is that we want to sustain, according to whatever it is that would qualify it as sustainable, will be sustained or could be sustained for that period of time? So lots and lots of unanswered questions that go to the most fundamental concepts from which the rest of the report flows. And then there are a couple of other related issues that compound the problem. One is the repeated references throughout the report to the natural environment. Again, we're faced with that question, the environment of what? But beyond that question, these references to the natural environment imply the existence of an unnatural environment. Well, what's the difference between the natural environment and the unnatural environment? And why are we concerned about one, but not about the other? It seems to me that these references to the natural environment rest on an unexplained assumption that pervades the report, and that is that human beings are not natural. That assumption is problematic on many levels for many reasons. And in fact, many scholars blame this problematic dichotomy between humans on the one hand and nature, whatever that is, on the other, for putting us in the predicament that gives rise or has given rise to the concern about sustainability. So this is another issue that compounds the definitional problem. And then finally, the report elides back and forth between sustainability and sustainable development as terms and concepts. So sustainable development, as defined by the Brundtland Commission, which the report adopts that definition, was an improvement on development as a human goal in a number of respects. But there's a pretty good empirical argument that sustainable development, as much of an improvement as it might be, is an oxymoron, a lot like sustainable cancer. So can it be done? Can development be sustained? Well, maybe. If it can be, then would the resulting situation be the most desirable one? Probably not, which is what brings us to sustainability. In any case, sustainable development and sustainability are not the same thing and are not defined as the same thing in the report. Yet the report slides back and forth between those two things as terms and as concepts, as if they were the same thing. So these many definitional issues, they're not trivial, they're not merely word games. The difference between answering those two questions that I saw with, what do we want to sustain, and how do we know when it qualifies as sustainable, the difference between answering them and not answering them up front is the difference between talking sense and talking nonsense in any discussion of sustainability education that follows. There you have it.
All right. I have to admit, I'm really happy to hear some of the things I'm hearing. I came at this from the other direction, though. I think overall the recommendations are generally fine. I doubt many working in the field would disagree with many of them, but that may be because they felt to me as if they've been around in some form for some time, both here and abroad. And the question of why we need to repeat them again then jumps to my head. It was nice to see complexity and experiential learning making at least an honorable mention in some of this work, as was the importance of diversity and inclusion, and at least implicitly social learning. I guess I was hoping to see more that was more new or forward thinking, more leading on. And I was also hoping to see a little more attention paid to international work, particularly in what were once thought of as the old English Empire countries, England, Scotland, Canada, Australia, South Africa. They've been doing some really interesting things in places like that. And I was also hoping to hear more from the efforts of professional organizations that are tied to environmental or sustainability issues. I think not spending much time with those led to the sidelining of some items. And there are two I would like to highlight, one because it's very close to my experience. It is clear that many programs lack clearly defined learning outcomes and program goals in the sustainability field. I mean, many are still a smorgasbord of off-the-shelf courses offered by more traditional disciplinary units. Now, building a program from first principles is one way to handle that issue, but there haven't been a lot of efforts trying to do that. But some have taken that on. I didn't notice a lot of reference to those. Interdisciplinary and higher order courses, by the way, it is possible to work at orders above interdisciplinary. They require dedicated faculty who are recognized for this type of work, who have a background in it, who are rewarded for developing these courses and programs. But faculty housed within traditional units typically have only limited incentives to build and develop integrated pedagogy, reach out beyond their departments, and they typically have limited resources and provisions for that. Which leads into the second concern that I had. The value of diversity and inclusion were noted, but they were noted in the report, but not necessarily in the report. It was mentioned by others already, the relatively limited scope. Most large institutions, large groups, even the smaller colleges that were referred to were relatively resource strong places, Dickinson, Pacific, Oberlin. There was at least one HBC example I remember that referred only to students who already had expressed a potential interest in the discipline by their selection of the major. So I've worked in HBCs for 20 years, very small ones, public and private. Smaller schools, students who aren't sustainability majors but need to understand these topics for everyone's well-being, not just their own. Depending on whether you pay attention to the Department of Education or Carnegie, you're talking about somewhere in the neighborhood of 40% of the students who are in small institutions. And roughly 40% then would have access only to relatively general biology programs, maybe even 2-year biology programs. If you're interested in creating change agents, are you only going to create change agents from one small group of individuals attending one very particular type of institution that has the large-scale resources and, you know, maybe the named college or the endowed chairs necessary to put this kind of stuff together in addition to the other things that they're doing? I really think more attention to the limitations and requirements of resource-limited institutions would be very valuable, especially if you're trying to set something out that is indicative of the field. Many of the recommendations that are in the report, I think, have been understood for some time, but evidently they haven't gained traction. What we really need, I think, is an understanding of how to do these things in such a way that the approach is not dependent on context. It doesn't matter if you're working in agriculture or you're working in engineering or you're working in marine science. It doesn't matter if you're in the middle of the US or on the coast, in a big school or a small one. You need to focus on approaches that are not dependent on context. That's where the work effort needs to occur, in my opinion. And that's a big reason, secondarily, to me, why truth in advertising approaches, like certification approaches, make much more sense to me than accreditation approaches for a discipline such as this, because there are so many useful contexts. So those were my thoughts, coming from the top down rather than from the bottom up.
Hello. So I'm very happy to be on this panel as well. Just a few notes about my background. I was a faculty member at SUNY ESF for 36 years and head of the Environmental Science Division for about 20 of those years, which is a college-wide program. And I've been an external reviewer for about 15 environmental programs across the country and Canada. And lastly, I helped create the Graduate Certificate of Advanced Studies in Sustainable Enterprises, which was both at Syracuse University and SUNY ESF. So I've been around for a while and I've seen a lot of different programs. I've seen a lot of different environmental programs. So I think some of our earlier panelists brought up a really good point that we have different kinds of institutions. We have look at your Carnegie classification. You have your PhD granting institutions, research one. You have all the way down to community colleges, right? Or 2-year institutions. The problem is, how do you develop sustainability programs and curriculum across the curriculum and for specific programs within all these different types of institutions? Now, Mike referred to what we call resource poor institutions. I noticed that the major panelists, the major academics, were all from tier 1 research granting institutions. Life is a lot different at other kinds of institutions, especially small liberal arts types of 4-year colleges. So we need a system that supports program development, whether it's sustainability studies and all these different contexts. And I think the report just falls a little short in terms of looking at that, especially in part 3, strengthening supportive academic environment. Also, one of our panelists also talked about faculty. Trying in a 4-year institution, trying to hire, recruit, and keep a teaching individual who's teaching some sustainability coursework or interdisciplinary work is a real challenge, especially in these economic post-COVID times. This is going to be a major challenge. Therefore, the federal support programs, which are also mentioned in the report, need to help in this regard. How do you enable different institutions at different levels to be able to have the kind of faculty and program delivery that you need? So we need a sort of a many-tiered kind of strategy, like the original IGERT grants, right? The National Science Foundation had. Also, in terms of research institutions, what kind of research can you do, especially at the undergraduate level, right? In a sustainability or environmental studies type of program. Again, we need a support system to enable that to happen. And finally, in terms of change agents and also in terms of dealing with dealing with other professional organizations. I've been a member of the National Association of Environmental Professionals for over 20 years. I'm a certified environmental professional nationally. I still do environmental consulting work. So I'm well aware of the kind of needs that different professional societies have. And again, I think a lot more could be done. Not that the NAEP or other organizations should dictate the students' background or what they need, but that there be some kind of communication and ability to track and flow. And finally, as Mike has sort of said, use accreditation or assessment not for you make it or you don't, but in terms of leveraging educational institutions so they can climb to higher levels of attaining sustainable education. Those are my comments.
Thank you, guys. And Michael, before you turn off your video, I can invite you to explain this trio that was in this grouping and the work that you all have done with a broader collection of professionals, all of which has been assembled in an interesting volume. And I would invite you to put the relevant URL in the chat box so people can follow up. It's really quite an amazing work, the book that your team put together. Michael.
Okay, I will do that shortly. Paul and I are, well, all three of us, Paul and I and Rick are all co-chairs of the Sustainable Human and Environmental Systems Roundtable. We're a group of academics and practitioners and agency peoples that started working a little over 10 years ago because we were encountering these types of issues, and at our different institutions, it was driving us crazy. We were trying to figure out how you would go about teaching an interdisciplinary or higher order course in sustainability and interdisciplinary environmental education. And we started working on that from first principles. And it took about a decade to put it all together, just the pedagogic side. We had a number of presentations and papers published mostly internationally and through UNESCO. They were really interested in it. We did have a book come out last year. I can put the link to it in the chat. Right now, we're in the process of trying to shift from, since we have a pedagogic model that we believe works from first principles, we're shifting now to the administrative aspects of it. Oh, thanks, Paul. So, okay, once you have these programs, where do you put them in the university? How do you support them? How do you get the faculty? How do you evaluate them? That type of thing, which really takes a different set of people. Most of the people who were involved with us over the first 10 years were academic types. They were interested in the pedagogy. Now we need to put together the group of administrative types interested in building programs and maintaining them. And that's what we're in the process of doing now. And actually, if you're one of those individuals that would like to be a part of that, stick your name and your email address in the chat box. We'll definitely get in touch with you.
Thanks, Michael.
Thanks.
So, well, in the interest of time, we will move on to our final pairing. I'd like to invite Madhavi Venkatasan, who is affiliated with Northeastern University and leads Sustainable Practices Limited, to join us, along with Todd Lavasser at the College of Charleston, who was the co-host of the Sustainability Literacy Symposium that SCC co-hosted early last year. Welcome to both of you. Madhavi, why don't you go first, and Todd can close out the first round.
Well, thank you so much for this invitation, Ira. I really appreciate being able to be here. I do have some similar comments that reinforce comments that have been made by other speakers, but then I have a couple others. So I'm going to start with the ones that are perhaps maybe a little different. One of the biggest issues that I see is that sustainability is not a discipline. So sustainability is a paradigm shift. And in its iteration as a discipline, that may be a necessary conduit in order to actually promote that societal change that we need in terms of how we look at the world around us and the human relationship with it. But it should not be a permanent element. What we are trying to actually do during this time period is to incorporate sustainability across the disciplines so that we can make it a norm as opposed to the prevailing economic system that we currently have in place. I say this because I am an economist, and principally sustainability is an economic issue from where I sit from my particular disciplinary focus. And I feel very privileged to have the disciplinary focus because it's actually an element of how we look at corporate behavior, how we look at individual behavior, how we look at government behavior. It all comes out of an economic framework. So from that perspective, I was appreciative of the fact that there was an interdisciplinarity that was noted and obviously runs through the report. But the view of it as being, of sustainability as being a discipline is a little counterintuitive in terms of my opinion related to the future of what we want to create. And I say that also because when we start to think of it as a discipline, we inevitably create a bureaucracy around its disciplinary extantness. In other words, people will want to keep their jobs based on their specialization in this particular area when it's really just a stepping stone to a future, a different way of looking at our future. Right now, our economic system basically wags the dog. With sustainability, we're letting the dog wag its tail. So that's what we're really trying to express when we look at this particular concept, this concept that is a paradigm. And from the standpoint of faculty and resources, the reality is the incentive of an institution, depending upon what type of institution it is going to be to make money and to also maintain its traction with regard to its population. So from that perspective, the incentivization has to be aligned to that of the institution itself, and not necessarily all institutions are that progressive to think forward. Many of them, unfortunately, because the prevailing economic model and the way that we think within specific time components. So where it really is incumbent upon those of us that believe that sustainability should be the wave of the future in terms of how we perceive and look at the world and believe our place in the world is, we have to find the way to align those incentives. To be a change agent, you have to be able to find common ground. So the other part that I thought that could be done better in this report was specifically related to the business rationale. Even though I am an academic currently, I have a background for several years. I worked in the corporate industry, specifically financial services. I do think that there is some relevance, obviously, if we're looking at disciplinary focus from that iterative approach until it's actually a pervasive element in society, that we also look to see how that brand premium of sustainability affects corporate behavior. So therefore you get corporate sponsors to promote an understanding of operationalized sustainability. So the other part, in terms of a mixed boat, where I think there's a shortcoming, is the lack of integration across all the different elements that actually can promote sustainability in a society, in an institution, and in a classroom. Integration is extremely important. Things have to be self-reinforcing. So these are my primary speaking points. I'd be happy to discuss any more in detail if possible, but the issue fundamentally to me is determining what is it that we're meaning when we talk about sustainability. Are we talking about a discipline, or are we talking about a cultural shift? And the educational component is a means of attaining that cultural shift. Thank you.
Hey, everybody. Actually, real quick, I'll hold up my copy of that book that was just being talked about. So definitely worth getting and reading if you all can. Well, thanks, everybody. Let me wrap up the panelist part, this first part, and thank you, Ira, for organizing this. And I'm sharing my comments from what was sacred land traditionally stewarded by the Kiowa and Yamasee peoples of Charleston. And my community here at the College of Charleston, where I teach and work, is at sea level rise, so highly vulnerable, and all of this is of urgency. So first off, thank you to the 6 people on the committee who generated this report. I do think this will help us shape the next 10 to 15 years of what sustainability in higher ed might be. Just some quick comments. I agreed with most of the recommendations. A little leery about number 4.4. That data is needed and will be helpful, but will we be open to the results? For example, the results may imply that, and I'm at a liberal science school, and the results might imply that a liberal arts and sciences model might not actually be appropriate if our understanding of sustainability is going to be shaped by for-profit businesses and their hiring trends as implicated in that recommendation. They briefly mentioned mutual aid in the preface. I'd like to actually hear more about what that is. I think there's a lot there about organizing higher ed, and I'll close with this too around concepts of mutual aid. It's been brought up before. Do we need to move beyond the triple bottom line as the understanding or definition? I appreciated them using the planetary boundaries of donut economics models. At the very least, do we want to be talking about strong versus weak sustainability? They talked about recommendation 3.2, the need for internships. I think we need to talk more about how do we strategically structure that, especially if millions of students in higher ed are going to be out trying to get internships. Already been talked about a lot. How do we get to interdisciplinarity if it's not supported by top-down? My experience running a sustainability literacy institute for 5 years is it's probably not going to happen. So a huge structural impediment. How do we measure being a change agent? And are we honest about the time commitment of mentoring such a student? This is recommendation 5.1. I think we probably need to talk a lot more about what does it mean to be a change agent, especially when most of us are trying to be change agents on our own campuses and probably aren't getting too far. Risk tolerance on page 60. We're dealing with COVID crunches. Most administrators are counting student credit hours right now. Are they going to accept the 5 to 10 to 15 year risk investment of building up sustainability all over? What does that look like to build that up? And again, this has to be top down. What most administrators, in my experience, still don't get it. They don't really know what sustainability in higher ed, what this whole discussion is about, and how it does need to be supported. What's the linkage between education and sustainability? Does educating students about sustainability actually lead to sustainability? I think there's an assumption here it does, and I've educated thousands of students over the years, and I don't know if any of them are living more sustainably now than before they took that class. Does education on sustainability actually even foster behavior shift at structural levels? Do we know higher ed is actually helping with that? The assumption is it does, but do we have the data that says it does? How can higher ed come together and advocate as a collective politically? If we know we need money for this, how do we get the federal government to get us money? I recognize this was more looking at STEM fields. I'm in the humanities. The arts and humanities pretty much were left out entirely of this whole report, which is kind of problematic. And then I'll end lastly with a critique here. I think we need to be honest. I didn't see anywhere in this a critique of capitalism, let alone neoliberal capitalism and white settler colonialism. And the academy is basically an offshoot of all those things. And as we know, neoliberal capitalism especially is a barrier to sustainability. How can we even think about changing higher education when it is a for-profit basically model? If this report doesn't even take on the key structural force causing unsustainability, globalization, settler colonialism. So let alone in the 10 to 20 years we have of averting large-scale collapse. So, the report starts with it's a sense of urgency. We've been seeing reports say it's a sense of urgency for 40 years, and we're probably going to keep getting those same reports for some reason, and that's a little frustrating. What do we got to do to actually meet the urgency and change? So I'll stop there. Thanks, Ira.
Great comments from both of you. At this point, since this was billed as a roundtable, what I'd like to do is invite all of the remaining panelists to turn on their cameras and reappear. I believe that David Blockstein had to leave at the top of the hour, so I don't think he's still with us, but I think, let's see, is Krista still here? Yeah, there she is. Okay, so what I'd like to do at this point, good, Rebecca. So for the remaining panelists, I know that several of you commented in the chat box on others' comments in the first round, and in the spirit of a roundtable, I wanted to give each of you the opportunity to offer either a follow-up comment on what you've heard or to ask a question of one of the other panelists. So why don't we go in more or less reverse order, since I know Todd was listening carefully to all of the other presentations. I'll start with Todd.
Yeah, thanks everybody. No, celebration of all your insights, all your passion, all of you trying to tip this needle. It's all needed. You know, Moira, just a reflection, a comment. I think one of the leverage points is administrators, and until they get it and see it, whatever that it is, as we've been saying, what do we even know what this it is? I think we're always going to be pushing that boulder up this hill. So I just think somehow we need enlightened leadership behind the purse strings, behind finding the donors, behind being visionary about how curricula needs to shift, whatever that looks like. And until that leverage point is really captured at everybody's institute, this is a hard task.
Mojave.
I'm actually going to just reflect on what Todd just said. I actually disagree. The issue is that faculty have become commoditized, and that's the reality of the profession that we're in. And to the extent that that is the case, and that universities now are more and more in a scramble just to be able to stay open regardless of what the institutional size is, which means that they're going to pander to what they can sell. It is almost more important for us, if we believe that sustainability is something that needs to be promoted, that we be the change agents for it and provide a rationale for the brand premium of an institution to sell it. So in other words, young people these days are more and more aligned to the idea of climate justice, social justice, environmental justice. We have to put together a package that shows how the university can benefit from this. And our benefit, because of those of us doing this type of work, we have a passion for it that is beyond income. So we have to actually be the catalyst for the traction of the changes that we want to see made. It is not going to come from the university on its own, just like it will not come from the federal government on its own, primarily because the government is out there looking for votes in order to stay in office, those people who represent us, and the university is aligned to their own income. So until those of us that want to see this change made become the agents of that change by actually incentivizing these other entities to align with an outcome of sustainability that also is mutually aligning to their own incentives, we will be fighting. That's the whole point of being a change agent. And I think it's time that we, instead of pointing fingers, that we start to come to common ground.
Rick, your turn.
I'd like to bounce off both of the previous two comments. I think from Todd's point, yeah, you need some leverage points. Give you one example. Our college a few years ago went for regional accreditation, right? Every higher education institution has to be regionally accredited, right? With whoever the accrediting body is. And they did it with an umbrella theme of sustainability across the whole institution. So it became part of the whole accreditation process. So that's what I mean about assessment, is it needs to be used at different scales, right? To force the whole thing, and realizing in these economic times, it's going to be even harder to do that. And I think for Modavi's point is that I think the change agent thing would be really good in climate justice or environmental justice, maybe some social leverage points. Also creating what I call new green technology or green infrastructure, energy systems. Whoever can do that in an innovative way that makes sense in the economic system is going to create another opportunity.
Paul, you're up.
The other the other comments that I've heard seem very insightful, and I really don't have anything to add.
We'll move on to Mike then.
This is really interesting. It's both very heartening and very discouraging to hear the comments, the things that have been presented and the comments to that. You know, Rick, you went through regional accreditation at a large place. We are now in the midst of doing that at a small place, and I have a program that is one of these very odd interdisciplinary or higher order combination scientific social information approaches in a school of science, engineering, and mathematics that has to be presented as a department within that. It's a real interesting thing to do. I think Madhavi, did I pronounce that correctly? I think her comments are a lot of the reason why Todd was able to make his comments. It's one of the things that the Roundtable has been dealing with for many, many years, is how you develop an actual model that will turn things out. Like I said at the end, the recommendations, most of those have been around. People who work in the field understand that these are the types of things we need to do, and yet we keep bringing up that these are the types of things we need to do because we haven't gotten to the point where here is how you make it happen, which is one of the things the Roundtable has been beating its head against the wall trying to do, make it happen. And even if you have a model that might work, that doesn't necessarily mean it can be implemented. You talked about administrative support. We haven't had that. I have a major with a 100% placement rate in the field at any level. Everyone moves into the field, but I have very, very, very few majors. We have to create it ourselves. We have to run the support ourselves. We have to do the recruiting ourselves. And we have research requirements. We have GPA requirements. And our students know what they're doing, but there are very, very few of them. Trying to get over that hump to make it a part of the culture of the institution has been an enormous challenge, particularly being at an HBC. Really enormous challenge, which was one of the reasons why I emphasized the smaller institution issue and this issue for actually making these things possible as opposed to making them known. So yeah, anyone with great ideas, come talk to me. We're willing to figure it out.
Thanks, Mike. Krista?
I really appreciated Todd's points in particular. We really face a tremendous challenge as a planet. And nobody mentioned the Higher Ed Sustainability Authorization Act, which was mentioned in the report, the 2007 Act that was reintroduced in 2019. And I think there's some potential with the new administration for some federal alignment and support in this area, yes. In the Global Council for Society and the Environment, we've been talking about the real possibilities of a new civilian conservation corps, getting community college students involved with some regenerative operations. And that's also tremendous potential. And the role of regional accreditors and disciplinary associations. So something about how this report could stimulate alignments from other organizations. You know, it's a yes and thing. It's a very good start, but perhaps a follow-up or a companion that points to other efforts. The resources in higher education are so just awesome, and we need them. These are amazing faculty that have information that students need and that communities need. We have research laboratories, we have equipment, we have grounds and buildings, and all of these things need to be sort of reallocated to address the multiple crises that we are facing.
Rebecca.
The conversation reminds me of that saying by Audre Lorde, you can't use the master's tools to tear down the master's house. And so then what tools do you use? And then you can also ask yourself, well, do scholars need a kind of house in order to develop that scholarly community for research and teaching? Do students need a kind of a professional identity? And I am really still trying to figure this out. But one thing I know for sure is that the old model of the 19th century university that Humboldt gave us is not going to work for this field. Just the division between the College of Arts and the College of Science presents a huge institutional barrier to true interdisciplinarity. So at the University of Dayton, we're not a department. We're what you could call a program, because there's no other word for it, in an institute. And it's messy and it's really difficult when it comes to a tenure track professor or developing a kind of faculty identity, but it's a really innovative way of going forward. It's just one. So in terms of offering education to our students, we are really just going to have to throw out the old book and think of educational communities very, very differently, that hopefully truly combat some of those economic and traditional, commodity-based structures in higher education.
Thank you, Rebecca, and thanks to all of you for just an incredibly rich assortment of insights and observations, not only about the report itself, but the current state of play in sustainability in higher education. I want to note that there were many interesting comments in the chat box. I will try to capture that for anyone who does not have access to that. What I would like to do to try to start wrapping up is to offer some perspectives from the Sustainability Curriculum Consortium and speculate a bit on where we go from here. One important reason why we were doing this roundtable today was the perceived need to get a fuller range of perspectives out there on the topics and issues covered in this National Academies report. From all the panelists, you've heard lots of good things. You've heard several gaps identified, and you've heard a few things that missed the boat. So in sum, I would say the report was nicely written, a great resource for those relatively new to the space, a useful overview, but with some serious flaws and gaps. And I asked the question, what would this report have looked like if before the committee got started, we as SCC had pulled together this panel? This is not a hypothetical question. And most of you don't know this, but that offer was made. That offer was rebuffed before the panel got started. It was rebuffed after the first workshop. It was rebuffed after the final workshop. So it was clear that as credentialed a panel as it was, they really didn't have a good feel for the sustainability in higher education landscape, as many of the other panelists pointed out today, with specifics in terms of size and types of colleges. And that's why we did make the effort to step forward and assist. I did attend the first workshop. There were a lot of well-intentioned people there that day, faculty, sustainability directors, not so many people who were totally immersed in the sustainability and education space. And that's a good thing, because we know that we still need to get the word out there to all these people. But that day, it was also clear that each member of the panel had their own particular interests, all of them valid, but I remained concerned that a coherent overview would be lacking when the final report appeared. The 18-month process also had something of a chilling effect on activities of other groups in this space, because, and I'll speak for SCC as I'm doing now, it was not clear what the panel would come up with, what their recommendations would be, whether it would be a step forward or whether it would be a recitation of the same old, same old. Many of you are also not aware of some of the peculiarities of the National Academies process. And I don't mean just for this panel. I've followed many National Academies processes. Almost all of them have been lacking in transparency. I will give credit to Anne Kapuscinski, the chair of this committee. She, from the outset of the first workshop, stated that she wanted this to be more transparent than the usual National Academies panel. So clearly she had heard those concerns. At the end of the process, I have to conclude, well, not so much, particularly after SCC offers to provide more information after the third and final workshop were rebuffed. Also, it affected other activities in the space because National Academy panel members are operating under National Academy rules that prevent them from communicating about the substance of the work with others in the field. As odd as that sounds, that is the case. And among the panelists, it caused Chris Boone of Arizona State to withdraw from some ongoing activities with some of the rest of us. So that was disappointing in itself. And those are the process issues. And of course, the concern with any National Academy report, which, as I factually stated at the outset, these are highly regarded reports. And most people, absent any other information, will take it as the final word, the latest word, the best word, and treat it as the tablets coming down from Mount Sinai. I don't believe that that is the case for most National Academies reports. It depends on who was on the panel and the process that they convened. In this case, I've already offered the bottom line opinion that it's a very useful overview report, but as others have pointed out today, with flaws and gaps. So where does that leave us? Well, clearly there's plenty of work to be done. And Sustainability Curriculum Consortium will remain that platform for not only those who were on the panel today, but all of you who were in attendance. And at this point, just so folks know, we do have more than 3,000 on our distribution list. So we have formed over the past 5 years a very solid community of practice. And we will continue working on these activities in close collaboration with ASHE. I mentioned we're an ASHE partner organization, and as several of the panelists are aware, we already have big plans for collaborative efforts with ASHE this year, including following up on the issue of competencies, which is not the domain of any one organization. We are going to continue to play in that space, as I announced at the AISHE faculty meetup. And we have always had a determination to be part of the dialogue, indeed convene a dialogue on the accreditation issues. Again, that topic is not going to be the domain of any one organization. We will maintain a transparent platform for sharing resources, tools, and perspectives. And so with that, I would like to wrap up today. I could say more about how this process was done, but I think that the incredible range of points that were made by the various panelists taken together has given all the attendees just an excellent sense of where things really are. With that, I thank those in attendance who've stayed with us to the end. I appreciate the panelists and thank them profusely, because the commentaries offered today greatly exceeded my expectations, and I'm deeply grateful. Thank you all.
See you, everybody.